Hello, and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we're bringing in the new year with a Nazi comedy, Jojo Rabbit, which I really liked the trailer for when I first saw it. I think it looked pretty funny. It's Taika Waititi, written and directed by, who is the guy behind Thor Ragnarok, and What We Do in the Shadows, which was pretty good. This got a TV version now, which I haven't seen.
I haven't seen it.
And Hunt for the Wilder People, which was lovely.
Yes.
And he's a really funny bloke with a really nice sort of... I like his comic sensibility. And I like the look of the trailer for this. And then I started to get kind of wary, just because... I don't know, I was sort of worried about it trivialising things that I think are actually worth being scared of these days.
Yes. It's a terrible film. Terrible. I shouldn't say that. I laughed a lot, but you know, if you read the newspapers at the moment, right, the synagogue in Amsterdam is not printing its schedules of services because of fear of attacks. You know, the rising incidence of anti-Semitism in New York, right, which is incredible. I mean, if you think about it, maybe some small town somewhere, but New York, right? The woman who was murdered in Paris, you know, for being Jewish. I mean, yeah, anti-Semitism seems to be like, you know, on the increase and really in frightful ways. And this film makes me deeply uncomfortable.
Spoilers coming up. Spoil the whole thing. I wouldn't have said it made me uncomfortable. And I would have to admit that I wanted to come into it with a more open mind than I did. I think I had some prejudices because of what I was worried about.
Oh.
So I have to admit to that. But it didn't really turn me around.
Yeah.
I think it's superficial. So what it shows is, I think Berlin, because when the film ultimately ends with the war being over, that's with the liberation of Berlin, I think. So I don't think it ever spells it out that's where they're living, but...
Yeah, well, there are no landmarks, so it's just a town in Germany, really.
Yeah, it's a town in Germany, a town or city in Germany. And this young lad is 10 years old, Jojo, is part of the Hitler Youth, and he's fanatical, and he loves Hitler, and he imagines Hitler to be his like best mate. He's an imaginary friend of his, played by Taika Waititi. He lives with his mum. His dad's away fighting the war, as far as he knows, as far as he's told. And his mum, turns out, is... giving safe haven in a sort of annex, in an attic bit, to a Jewish girl who's 17 years old. Jojo discovers her, and then of course that completely screws with him, and he can't handle it, and then he's terrified of Jews in all those ways that you kind of don't believe that people are really scared of Jews anymore, but some still do. I mean, my gran, I'm Jewish, and my gran, when she was evacuated to Coventry in the war, she was born in 27, so she'd have been 14 or 15 maybe, went to live with a family who had never seen a Jew before. No one had seen a Jew before, and everyone came round. Oh, look, where are the horns? You know, genuinely, that's what. So people certainly held those ideas back then. And I think a lot of people probably still do, who aren't all that educated and don't think they know what Jews are.
Yes. Well, my grandmother, who was a lovely woman, but one of my aunts went to work as a nanny for a Jewish family in Montreal. And my grandmother in Spain basically, wrote her as, forbidding her to work for people who'd killed Christ.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, that's not very far from,
No. I think Christopher Hitchens had something quite interesting to say about the reason that Jews are hated by almost everybody. He said that Jews are the one people who actually encountered Jesus and Muhammad, the prophets of these other two major religions, and said, no, not for me. They're all right, but they're not the Messiah. And so they go, okay, well, the Jews aren't for us then. They don't like our Messiah.
Anyway, the point is that we're too close to anti-Semitism, or I'm too close to it, I suppose, to feel comfortable with the film's depiction of it. Because actually, it just reiterates and recirculates stereotypes and images that are still, I think, all too powerful, and the film doesn't deflate them, it deploys them, really. So I had quite uncomfortable moments, in the film. I mean, it made me queasy, right? So it had moments of humor that worked. It actually moved me, as well.
Yeah, it moved me a little bit at the end.
But I agree that I do think it is superficial. It's, so for example, the film that I was comparing it to was To Be or Not to Be. Lubitsch, and that wonderful scathing comedy, right? And so I was thinking, well, of course, you have to make fun of these things, right? But the thing about the Lubitsch, and Lubitsch is, I think, the kindest and most delightful of directors, but his poking fun at the Nazis was pretty scathing. And actually, this is like in
the middle of the war as well.
And in the middle of the war, this is nowhere near as scathing or biting or, it's kind of.
You said that it deploys the images, it doesn't kind of deflate them enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the problem with it is that all those images are actually deflated. That's kind of what I mean when I say it's superficial. It deploys this imagery, but it doesn't make me. It doesn't give any insight into why people thought this way. What was so scary about it? The thing about Nazis is it's funny. I was thinking about the way that the word Nazi and the word Jew are used are in some respects kind of similar, because once that's applied to someone, you just think that's who they are. And of course, they're not entirely the same. Like being Jewish is kind of cultural identity, and being a Nazi is something that you become, and it's an ideology.
It's also a cultural identity,
but not in the same way, right? And it kind of made me think that one of the things that the film, in its superficial way, is making very obvious is Jews are people like anybody else. That's completely clear with the Jewish character, the girl. She spins all these stories to Jojo about what the Jews are like and how we all sleep upside down and stuff, and you just know they're bollocks, right? You hopefully know they're bollocks. But when it comes to Nazis, the thing that's important is to understand that Nazis are people too, and it's not like a special case of evil where you become a Nazi. They are people with ideas, and those ideas need to be understood and attacked and
contested, yeah.
Right. And actually, the image of Nazis here is either like the Gestapo ones, who are just believe what they believe and they're down the line and they are official and all the things that you would expect. The other ones you get are. I had a real problem with the Sam Rockwell character.
He's very endearing.
Well, it's not so much that he's endearing, although he is, but it's that he's a kind of resistor. Right, he's supposed to be this German captain, and you're given some context. So you're given the context of he was fighting in the war, and then he screwed something up, and that's why he's babysitting all these kids in the Hitler Youth, and he's not happy with it, and he's a bit of a drunk, and he's very sarcastic about the whole thing. So you get some context as to why he has kind of lost, I suppose, a certain level of faith with the Nazi movement, or that kind of thing. But still, he, at a very important point in the film, understands that this girl is a Jew and helps her not get captured and killed. That's pretty serious, and it's not something I believe at all. And I think these kind of, you get this real sense of an active resistance within the middle of Germany at the height of the war. And I don't believe it. And I think it's this.
Well, there was
there's like a lazy ideological project in there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my main fault with the film is that it's kind of, I think it's funny in this typical Taika Waititi way, really, which is kind of gentle, and off the wall, and there's a kindness behind it, really. So, I laughed a lot more than I expected to do. But I just think, it's not the right time for the subject. I don't think. And it's not the right way of handling it. I think the material is still very volatile, and one needs to be tactful around it. And then if you are going to attack it, you have to do something kind of better and more focused and more resisting, than this, really. I think there were whole stretches of the film where I was slightly bored. I didn't know what was happening. And then there were moments that were like comical turns, but they were full of charm. So, for example, what's his name now?
Steve Merchant?
Steve Merchant.
As the Gestapo officer.
I mean, it's quite funny, and he gives a very charming performance. But actually, I just think it's kind of wrong, to make that a kind of a charming comic turn, you know.
I had a similar problem with Waititi as the imagined Hitler, because he's not actually Hitler. He's Jojo's imaginary friend version. Yeah. But I think on one hand, I thought it was lazy storytelling and character development to basically give Jojo this imaginary friend who he can have these dialogues with that express, you know, kind of the way he's feeling and the problems and the conflicts and all that sort of stuff. I thought it was pretty lazy. Like, better storytelling would have not needed that, right? But also then bringing in this kind of comic Hitler it has this feeling of he dances and he moves funny and he eats a giant chocolate unicorn and he's silly and funny, and I think it contains within it this implicit idea that by making Hitler look ridiculous, it punctures him, and I don't think it does at all.
I think it does the opposite. It's because it makes him endearing. I mean, you know, I think it's a lovely performance. It is like a comic turn, but actually the effect of it is, you know, that you think, oh, you know, Hitler's so sweet, right? Yeah, and wacky, you know, and charming. I mean, I do think it kind of gives off the wrong message.
I just think it's something to be taken more seriously than it does, and I think I dislike this. Again, I think implicit idea, not just in this, but in a lot of comedy, and a lot of particularly British comedy, I find it, where you know, people have this idea that we could never have had a Hitler in this country, speaking about Britain this is, because we would never have taken him seriously. Once you saw that silly moustache and all the rest, you know, we'd have laughed him out of the room. Well, that's bollocks. And that's a ridiculous level of hubris. And it's that attitude that means that we actually could have a Hitler. You know?
Actually, you know what I was thinking in the film? You know, and again, kind of trying to relate it to Lubitsch, because he's the first one who came to mind, is how no one in American cinema has the balls, you know, to make a Trump film, right? Like, if part of what comedy is meant to do is kind of puncture pretensions and, you know, and kind of deflate and critique and lay bare, you know, actualities kind of, you know, through comedy, right? Kind of, why isn't anyone in American cinema doing it? There's so much to, like, poke fun at, you know, at the moment, right? So Saturday Night Live does it, right?
Yeah, it happens I was going to say, it happens on TV quite a bit.
It happens on TV, but there isn't a great dictator film or, you know, or a To Be or Not to Be, or, you know, any of those kind of really kind of scathing comedies, you know, about Trump, you know. And yet, kind of, what better material can you be given, right? So also it's very safe to kind of put this in the past.
Yeah, like, these are not people who need satirising anymore, in a way.
Whereas the followers, the Victor Orbáns of the world, or the Bolsonaros of Brazil, or the Trumps, you know, in America, or indeed the
Farages.
The Farages of this world, they do need puncturing, right? And no one's taking them on, you know. So
no, but then I also get tired of the idea that you know, people who, like, I love comedy, you know, and I love good satire, but I don't believe that it ever really makes a difference.
I think it does.
I really don't.
Well, I think it does.
And I think the idea that, you know, the reason that they get rid of comedians and artists at first is because they threaten them. I think it's to an extent true, but I don't. But
it's historically true.
It's historically true, but I don't think, you know, it's not because they're scared of their power being diminished by being made fun of.
Well,
because ultimately an army of jackbooted thugs will overcome a satire.
Well, we also know now that is also true, but all the totalitarian regimes, the first thing they do is they clear out, you know, the writers and the intellectuals, and, you know, basically shoot them or leave them without jobs. So that is a fact.
I know that's true, but I mean, the reasoning behind it, I think, is overstated.
The reasoning behind it is because they are scared of them. If not, they wouldn't touch them. You know, it takes a lot of effort to root them out, you know, so, and the effort is undertaken. And I think you underestimate the power of comedy. I think, you know, kind of comedy has the power to change entirely your perception of something. As soon as you start laughing at someone, right, like, you know, in particular ways, they can never recover, and they often don't.
I would like that to be true, but I think in the case of people who are really powerful, it's not. And in the case of ideologies that are really powerful. And also, this speaks to an echo chamber, I think, where one side sees what they want and the other side doesn't, or ignores it, goes on with it.
Well, I mean, I think that is also true.
You know, more comedians in the cabaret did not stop Hitler. You know, I think it's overstated, and I think it's a bit of a crutch that we like to use. We like to think that we're better than these ideologies. We like to think that we're more powerful and that we can punch them.
Separate,
I just don't agree with it.
Let's separate strands there, right? Because I do think that we can be complacent, and I certainly don't think that we're better or more aware or smarter, than our antecedents, right? So, if stuff happened in the past in places like Germany, it wasn't because Germans were stupid, right? It's not because we are more clever and would never let that thing happen. In fact, these things are happening all over the world now. Kind of one needs a more global perspective. I think one of the problems with like British culture at the moment is that it's entirely insular. Even, the intellectuals are entirely insular, right? Like kind of, you read the newspapers and you see so little about the world and about the rest of Europe and, kind of what's going on. It's mainly focused on Britain and America, and it's a problem, right? So I do think that, we need a greater awareness of these issues, and if we had a greater awareness of these issues, we wouldn't feel so superior to the past. So, that's one thing. But I also think that, comedy is very powerful, that it does have the power to puncture. Of course, kind of we live in a place with like, tons of different media and so on. So, for example, let's say the Queen, all the comic effects making fun of the Queen, well, in a way they get drowned out because, you also have so many loving homages of the Queen at all the time, and all these things kind of circulate in relation to each other. It's not as if you make one great film that kind of like really pokes fun at somebody, that it'll kill that, because it is kind of, competing with other dialogues and other kind of, it's part of a larger dialogue, I suppose. But nonetheless, I mean, there have really been instances where kind of somebody has just not been able to show their face again because, of the particular effectiveness of a comic kind of sketch about them.
I agree.
And so I think...
if you look at John Major, the way he was kind of skewered in Spitting Image in the late 80s and early 90s, the puppet they used for him was entirely grey. And that really followed him around, that image. But then on the other hand, if you look at the way Spitting Image portrayed Margaret Thatcher, it portrayed her as strong amongst her cabinet, and I think that really followed her around too and made her stronger culturally.
Sure.
Anyway,
the point is, I think culture has an influence. I think one shouldn't overestimate it. It's not like having an army entirely at your disposal to do your everything you will. But in a democracy, it's amongst the most powerful of tools.
I agree, but I do agree ultimately. Like, of course, culture is important and has an influence, but really all I'm getting to is I think we do overestimate it. I think we do think it's more powerful than it is sometimes.
Perhaps, but let's go before that. I think before you can make the argument, right, that we overvalue it or think it's more powerful than it is, that we should first have something, right? And my argument is that our culture is not producing that at the moment, right? Kind of, you're not getting kind of these satire, or certainly in cinema, where are these satires of Trump, or of Johnson, or of Brexiteers, or like, kind of, you have lone comedians kind of, doing monologues on it. And there's a kind of an ironic way of talking about those things, but that's not the same as, elements of the culture really kind of taking on board like this project to critique it properly, which I don't think we've seen. So I think before we can say, it's only partially effective or it's not very effective or whatever, we have to ask why is it non-existent?
Yeah.
Why is there an absence of it at the moment?
The thing is, the late night shows in America really are chock full of Trump material. Like, that is the standard monologue. It's on Stephen Colbert and on Seth Meyers, and I don't watch Kimmel and the other Jimmy Fallon, but I imagine they talk about him a lot as well. So it's kind of standard, but also it's kind of blasé, or it's like, this is the thing that we do and then we get on to the interview. It doesn't feel important enough. And actually at one point I got really pissed off with it when Donald Trump was attacking the squad, they called them, these four women who were kind of banding together. There was Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez,
yes,
Ilhan Omar, and a couple of others. I don't remember their names. and Trump was really attacking them. And on Colbert, they were doing this thing where they had like a 70s sort of Charlie's Angels type sting that went, "The Squad!" And that's how they introduced the piece on The Squad they would do every night. And it really started to get me pissed off because I thought, like, Donald Trump might actually get one of these women killed.
Yes.
You know, he'll piss off his followers enough that one of them might go out and kill one of them. And then how will you feel with your "The Squad"? You know, it all got very... I think in doing the little bit every night, it actually does fail to take it seriously.
I think it does the opposite. I think it normalizes it anyway, right? And also it trivializes it because, you know, you have maybe 2 or 3 good jokes about Trump, you know, and then Harrison Ford comes in to sell his latest movie or whatever, and actually all of those things are made equivalent.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of those shows are subject to, you know, a kind of the normal kind of capitalist structures and drives, really. And, you know, so kind of the critique is rendered ineffectual. You know, you get 2 jokes about Trump, like 5 jokes about Harrison Ford's latest movie, or you get kind of commercials for cars in the middle of it and all this aspirational stuff. I mean, that is not what I'm talking about, you know.
Exactly. And so when you were saying that it's not the time to make this film, I mean, I would completely disagree. Like, it is the time. The thing is to do it better than this.
Maybe.
You know, I mean... I'm wary. I know what you mean when you say that about making a film this light, like, because I have a similar criticism. Like, it's not taking it seriously enough. It's not insightful enough. But I'm always wary about saying, well, it's not the time, because I also don't want to kind of be the guy who's like, you know, I just don't find this kind of humour funny, because I do find it funny when it's good and when it feels contextually kind of justified and appropriate. And I just... This felt out of place with the society it goes into. It felt like it felt too light for the world it's going into. And so Jojo, the character Jojo, hates Jews, and he's a full-on little Hitler Youth kid. But as you say, he's kind of quite endearing, like everyone is in this. And what I really want, rather than the imagery of a kid wearing that uniform and has the knife and his room's covered in posters and he believes all this, I wanted something deeper that said, why does he believe this? How has he been taught this? Why has he been taught this? How does everyone think in this world? Like, that's kind of what I want, because that is the stuff that really relates to the way we live today and the problems that we face today with fascism. And that's not what the film does. The film says this is kind of what Nazi Germany looked like, and I don't think gets under the surface of psychology and ideology. No,
I mean, I don't think it sets out to, right?
Well,
because, you know, in a way, I think the film is very light, right? It's set out to be very light. I mean, my problem is, in a way, its success, that it is very sweet and it is very, very endearing, you know. But in the process, I think it makes all these kind of Nazi characters and Nazism itself kind of sweet and endearing. It might have been a wrong turn in history, but, you know, anyone can make it, and, you know, fundamentally people are nice, really, and they just get caught up in these things. I mean...
It definitely seems to say that, like, everyone gets a chance to do the right thing, and they often do in this.
Whereas Lubitsch, his Nazis were grotesque and threatening and deadly and stupid, right? It's like when the guy goes at the end of the film, jump out of the plane, they go, "Hi Hitler, jump," right? That's telling you something about, like, blind following, and so it's funny. Yeah, but it's also, like, extremely critical. There's nothing like this in this film.
No, certainly not to that degree. There is the scene where the Gestapo searches the house, and Steve Merchant has a couple of good lines about, you know, it's quite an uncomfortable line, and I think in the right way. This is the kind of little boy's room I like to see.
Yes.
He says, and then it's a line from the trailer. I wish all of our young boys had your blind fanaticism.
Yes.
Which is a nice line. And it's got a bit of a sting to it, but that's kind of all it is. Although I did think that whole scene actually had quite a bit of tension that I enjoyed. I thought it was a well put together scene.
I think it's very well put together.
And of course, the message underlying it is they can't tell that she's Jewish.
I know, but
you know.
I know and I agree. But for me, the main message of it is, aren't Nazis sweet and charismatic and actually honourable, right? The reading of the passport, you know, and the lying about the age.
I agree. That's what I don't like about the Rockwell character. And it is too kind of charming, but still, it's aiming at a certain thing, and I think, like I say, that there's been so much in the film about the literal physical differences between Jews and everybody else, that all these people believe that they have horns and that they lay eggs and all the rest of it, that I think it's actually fairly subtly done in that scene, where it's not pointed out at any time they couldn't tell you were Jewish. It's just there, they can't tell you, and it's that obvious that element of the hatred is so obviously stupid.
Yes.
So I like that element of it.
Well,
it's only an element.
I can see it. Anyway, I laughed and it moved me, but also I think it's very superficial, and it made me uncomfortable.
So that discomfort, we've talked about it in terms of them being too sweet and charming and nice and kind of liking everyone.
No,
are there other elements to it?
Yes, there are. I mean, I think the thing that you mind less, I minded more. I think actually that, those images of Jews as bats hanging from the ceiling, all that story about Jews are really like this, they have horns, and then you're shown the images and so on. I think you'd be surprised that,
No, I was definitely thinking that. People probably still really do think
exactly,
that.
And so circulating those ideas and those images, which, were really a staple of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, right? And it's the same images and the same cliches. So to kind of recirculate them like that under the guise of poking fun at them is to have a much more secure sense of moral order in the world than I have.
I agree. I think it assumes that everyone knows that this is nonsense, and by simply putting it in the film and saying people believe this, we will all laugh. So how could they believe it? And that's not necessarily the case.
Those young men who were chanting, "Jews will not overtake us.
Jews will not replace us."
Or will not replace us.
Was it Charleston, was it?
I would like to see what they make of scenes like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the way that Nazis Nazis and the alt-right and whatever you want to call them can turn sort of satire into whatever they want to make themselves turn the symbols around and make themselves happy with them, and then start using them as dog whistles and codes and things. Like it's really another half of the world that you just don't see if you're not in it.
Yes.
Or you don't research and that kind of thing, and you would always be surprised. So this film does come across as being made by someone who has never actually encountered that sort of thing,
yes,
and has no familiarity with it and doesn't even really understand that it exists.
Yes, I agree. Despite
all of that, it would be unfair to say that there's kind of no skill in it, or that it doesn't achieve things that it wants to achieve. As we both agree that we move towards the end, the relationship between Jojo and Elsa, is it Ilsa?
Yeah.
The relationship between those two is quite touching. Again, it comes out of, it's trying to make this very sort of basic point that if you just get to know someone, then all of this kind of hatred falls away. And again, I wish you actually understood why Jojo thinks the way he does more. I think it's a problem that the Jewish character is a bit of a blank. To an extent, she's really only there to
provide an easy moral lesson,
feed into Jojo's story and character development, and actually the fear that she has and what she's gone through, you don't really feel.
Anyway, I wasn't moved by that at all. I mean, the moment that moved me was when, Scarlett Johansson, who plays Jojo's mother, gets hung for her political activism, and it's actually very beautifully shown because you just see her shoes. And there's a whole thing about showing love through the tying up of shoes and so on, and there's a moment where he sees the shoes and he realizes it's his mother, and he hugs the shoes, and he doesn't want to look up, he doesn't want to know that it's her quite yet, and so I found that quite moving.
Yeah, and it's very well set up because throughout the film we've seen her shoes.
Yeah. And
when she kind of walks above him on the thing and the shoes are eye level and you see just her shoes dancing, it's actually very elegantly done that and quite tastefully done because you don't see the full figure of her. You just know that's what's happened. And although I'd say the moment, I mean, it didn't move me, although I got it. The moment that moved me was much more conventional. It was when the two of them, I can't remember exactly what it was, but they basically say thank you and help each other and all that sort of stuff. There was a moment there towards the end that moved me, and I also think that I do think that Taika Waititi handles some tonal shifts in the film quite well. So the moment that you mentioned where the mother dies would be one of them, and when when the Russians and Americans liberate Germany at the end, basically,
Right.
and then you start seeing you see all these children being handed guns and forced to fight, and mothers dead in the rubble. It gets quite dark, some of that imagery, and I think Waititi handles the shift into that more somber, more kind of serious tone quite well.
The thing that I like best about the film was the relationship between the two boys. Yeah, Jojo and his second best friend. I thought that was like kind of really sweet and really funny.
The little boy's lovely. He's a good actor as well.
Yeah. So those were my favorite bits. And so I think it's important to say, right, like, on a certain level, the film works. On a certain level, it makes me uncomfortable. And I do think that it's very superficial. And that is a criticism. So you can argue, well, kind of comedies being superficial is not a big problem. But actually, I think it is. I think, this is very light stuff, even for comedy.
Yeah, I would say it's to do with it handling sensitive material in the context of it's clearly trying to talk about the modern day, or relate this to the modern day to some degree. It's not saying the Nazi Germany was just separate from now. There's a reason that this has been made now.
Sure.
And I don't think it actually makes those connections well enough. And I think it essentially does feel like it separates that time and says, well, this was different. And ultimately that thing of everyone gets to do something nice and everyone gets to say we don't really believe this is a problem. I think it's also an issue which would go along with this, that the film is set in 1944 and 45 when the German war effort is already kind of clunking to a crash. Like right at the start, you've got the Sam Rockwell character saying, I'm going to teach all of you young boys to grow up and then die, basically is what he says. Like, he's already saying the war is over at this point, almost. So, it would be more interesting to do this when Nazi Germany is at the height of its powers.
Yes.
Like, I think
But then there would have been no easy solutions. So,
exactly. But that's the point. It gives it an easy solution. It gives it this context to say, well, this is why people... It also makes it more believable that people are giving up on the war, if you like, because it's failing, But imagine this when it's at its height. It's
when they were winning victories all over Europe.
Exactly. So I think it makes easy or lazy even decisions and treats the subject too lightly.
Righto. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Yes.
We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube and Spotify to listen to us. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Great, thank you.
Cheerio.